All right, welcome everyone to the very last class of CS 194A, which is our intro class here at Stanford. For this very last session, what I want to spend time today on is the panel discussion with Annyce, Chiu-Ki, Christina, and Sam. So thank you so much to the four of you for being here. And I want to start out just by having an introduction, and we'll go in the order shown on the panel, on the screen here. So Annyce, I'll start with you, then Chiu-Ki, Christina, Sam. And just how we start with the question of, tell us about where you came from, what are you doing now, and maybe a fun fact about yourself.
So where I came from, well, a long time ago. No, so actually, I've always been super interested in science and technology. I went to a tech elementary school, middle school, high school, and I ended up studying computer engineering. At one point, I really was super into electrical engineering, and I thought I was gonna like actually build hardware and stuff until I started taking electrical engineering classes. I really hated them a lot. Capacitors and resistors weren't for me. So then I doubled down on the computer science courses and just finished my degree in computer engineering anyway. And initially, I started out doing help desk support because I could not get a job as a programmer. Super frustrating. I'll tell you that long story another time. Then I became a programmer. I was doing web work and I was doing backend APIs and then finally Android. So that's me.
Awesome. And then I also, before we move on to the next person, I want to just take the opportunity to embellish each of you a little bit. So I think one of the things I found really impressive about Annyce is that she has created a bunch of educational content available for other developers. So she's very involved in helping to teach and educate. For example, I think I stumbled upon one of your LinkedIn learning courses, Annyce, and it has a ton of students. So I think that's one thing that I'd also love to, during the panel, talk more about how you got involved with that and what is your perspective on teaching other developers as a developer. Okay,
Cool.
awesome.
Annyce
Chiu-Ki,
is
go
also
ahead.
speaker goals.
Yeah,
She's
that's
like
true.
an incredible technical speaker.
I think most of you on the panel, all of you on the panel are speaker goals. But yeah, definitely Annyce is definitely in that category. Okay, Chiu-Ki, go ahead.
All right. So my name is Chiu-Ki Chen, and don't know how far back you want me to go, but I grew up in Hong Kong, and I think I started programming pretty young, kind of by accident, because my mom enrolled me to a course, like a summer course in the community center for computers. So I think she thought we are learning how to type and how to use the mouse, but it was actually a basic programming course. So, and I did it. I loved it because as an 8-year-old, no one listens to you, but the computer does. Like as long as you give it the command and it will faithfully execute whatever you tell it to do. So I was kind of hooked, but didn't really do anything more beyond that until college. But once I was in college, I knew I wanted to do computer science. That was pretty clear. And also in Hong Kong, you select your major before you enter. So it was really weird to come to the States for university and people are like, I don't know what I want to do. I was like, oh, that's allowed. So I knew pretty clear undergrad and I also got a master's. I got my master's from Stanford. So hello, everybody. It's pretty interesting because afterwards, like getting a job in the industry, you don't really use a lot of what you exactly learn in school. I mean, we didn't have an Android seminar back then because Android wasn't a thing. But still, like I think my education background was a lot more theoretical than maybe these days. Like schools recognize more of the practical side of things. So I never knew what is a source control almost when I was in school. Well, we had a little bit of source control, but nothing fancy. You have to anyway. Let's not get there. But I basically kind of got a software engineer job. Has been kind of full time doing that for a while, and then I maybe 9 years ago or so I left my full-time job and I became an independent developer, which is kind of interesting. So what that means is I go talk to startups. And back then it was at the point where most apps are iOS only, and there was no Android version, and I was specializing in Android. So I just go and say, hey, your customers would like to do Android. Would you like me to help you? So I work with pretty small companies and kind of single-handedly bring up their Android presence. And then I've been doing Android since then, like independently. But as an independent developer, the path is very different. So happy to answer any questions if you're interested. It takes a lot of initiative, a lot of deciding what you want to do and go for it. So I also do a lot of different things like teaching, I speak at conferences, and it becomes more holistic, I would almost say, when you're an independent developer. So if you're interested, I can spend more time talking about that.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that kind of the typical path for a Stanford student, I think, is to go on and work at a large company or mid-sized company. So it's quite interesting to hear about how you made that decision. The other thing I want to mention about Chiu-Ki is that one talk that I don't know where you gave it, but that I listened to, which was quite impactful for me, was about testing. And don't be upset, but we have not talked about testing at all in this class. So one thing that I think might be valuable at some point today is Chiu-Ki just kind of giving us your thought about Android testing and how do you integrate that? How do you propose that students learn more about testing?
Sure thing.
Okay, awesome. And then Christina.
Hey everybody, my name is Christina. It's always fun to go after really awesome people because you realize that your story's maybe a little bit rougher around the edges. So whatever Annyce said, I'm the opposite of that. Like I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no idea I wanted to be in tech. In fact, when I went to college, I was like, I'm undeclared, like Chiu-Ki was saying, you can do that. So I went in undeclared. And the only thing I knew was that I didn't want anything to do with CS. So I went in undeclared to NYU to pursue some sort of humanities. And then my first semester was like, oh gosh, I really miss tech, or I really miss like the, science classes that I had in high school. And so fast forward, I ended up dual enrolling in 2 colleges and I got 4 STEM degrees. So the joke was on me. I said the only thing I didn't want to do was go into STEM, and I ended up with 4 STEM degrees. So, it worked out in the end, but I definitely am a person who does not have their life figured out. And it's kind of just worked out. And I've been really fortunate despite not having any foresight or planning skills. So I have degrees in computer science, math, mechanical engineering, and robotics, but I only work in Android at this point. So I'm only really utilizing my computer science degree. And when I came out of college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I figured 2 things. I wanted to make money, and I thought that the thing that differentiated me from other people in the market was that I knew how to work hard. So the way I acted on those 2 insights was I decided that if the thing that set me apart from other people was an ability to work hard, then one place I would thrive is startups, where you basically trade a lot of hard work for a lottery ticket at a lot of money. And then the other thing is that I knew I wanted to make money. That was very important to me. And so I went online and I Googled when I was graduating college what the highest paying technical job was. And it turned out that on the day that I Googled it, it said that Android developers made more than any other developers in computer science. This was before machine learning and all of that. It's changed now. And so I combined that to say, great, I'm graduating. I'm going to go to a startup and I'm going to be an Android engineer. And that's how I got into Android engineering. So that startup is actually where I met Chiu-Ki. As she mentioned, she went independent, and that's where we met. She was working with us on the Android app for that startup. That startup got bought by Pinterest, and I've been at Pinterest ever since. So I kind of went the startup into acquisition into a growing now post-IPO company. So that's my Android history.
I love it. Yeah, I feel very lucky that day that you Googled for high-paying jobs, Android engineer came up, because the Android community is very lucky to have you. And then
I feel the same about you.
And Christina and I actually worked together at Pinterest. And one of the things I really remember distinctly is how bullish Christina was about Kotlin. So one of the things that I've told students about is the rate of change in Android and how do you keep up with different languages, different frameworks. And so I think one thing that Christina can speak to quite eloquently is how do you make decisions about language, framework, new technology in Android? Okay,
Thanks, Rahul.
Sam, last but not least, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam. I currently work at Robinhood, and I guess my path to Android was also kind of like roundabout. I actually entered college as a biology major to do like pre-med, and then I think like I kind of was working in like a research lab, and they had me learn Python, and I think I got really into it, and then decided to switch my major. And then the first class that you take was in Java. And at the time, like, this was like 2012, like Android was kind of primarily done in Java, and I think I was like on Christmas break kind of looking for something to do, and like Android kind of popped up as like something to do in Java. So started learning stuff, kind of tinkering, released like one app on the Play Store, had like one internship at a company called Flipboard, which is like a news app. And yeah, after that, did my first job out of school was also at Pinterest. So I worked with Rahul and Christina there for a couple years. Then decided to come over to Robinhood, and I've been there for the past like 2.5 years or so. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think one perspective that Sam has, which is pretty unique, is that I feel like you've worked on a whole bunch of Android code bases. So Flipboard, we worked together at Pinterest. Now you're at Robinhood. You've also done your own apps, along with, I think you've had some meaningful open source contribution as well. So I think talking about how do you get into a new code base and ramping up and being productive is something that Sam can talk about. Okay, so if you're just joining us, I have a bunch of questions ready to go, but at any point, any student, just feel free to interrupt or put your question in the chat if you have something. But I'm going to start out with one question, which I already have planned, which is the introductions that each of you gave was super helpful. I want to talk about Android in particular. So I think some of you touched on it a little bit, but when you were deciding that you wanted to be a software developer or programmer, how did you decide on Android in particular? And I think each of you has been doing Android for a while now. So I have a part 2 of that question, which is that if you were to make the decision again today, would you still pick Android development as the path within software engineering? So anyone can go. There's no order here. If you have a strong thought or opinion, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. I picked Android because I had an Android phone. I mean, really, like I was a backend developer. I got an Android phone, and I knew that Android phones allow you to write code for them. And I thought that was amazing. And it was like, they don't even make this brand anymore. Like, that's how long ago it was. But I could make something and carry it and show people. And before that, every time I tried to tell my family like what I do, it just didn't register. They're like, oh, that's great. Can you fix my printer? Like the classic thing. But when I had my Android phone, then all of a sudden it clicked for people. Like, oh, that's what programmers do. I'm like, yes, all of these things are programs. And that, it just stuck. Once I knew that I could do that and carry around my work with me, I almost felt like an artist carrying a giant portfolio with them everywhere they went. And that's what I loved about Android. Should I answer the second one? Like, would I do it again?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, because I want to know your opinion.
Would I do it again? Absolutely, yes. The reason why is Android is pretty special in that I almost feel like a full stack engineer. I'm learning SQL. I'm working with databases. I'm trying to design models and systems. I'm working on the user interface. I have to understand about networking, basically all the things. And that allows me to think about systems better. Working in a constrained system, I think, is an advantage because you think a lot about resources, allocations, and things that other developers may not. They go with certain assumptions. And so would I do it again? Yeah. The community is really amazing. And I have been parts of other communities and kind of like dipped my toe in it a little bit, and it's not the same as the Android community.
That makes sense. Anyone else on that? Why Android, and would you do it again?
I can pick up from there, so I'm going to answer it backwards. come with the answer if I will do it again now, because I that's the last thing on my mind. So I think I will answer in two parts. One is, will I do it again? And if someone asks me if they should do it, whether they would do it, because those two are completely different, at least like from my perspective, because I have been doing it for so long that at this point I have done a lot of different technologies. Like I've been on Android for a long time, but I was a web dev before then. I spent like a year or two doing Python and Django and Ruby on Rails and like JavaScript, CSS, like that, the whole thing. And it was fine. Like to me, technology is a tool to solve problems. So at this point, I've done enough that I'm not necessarily really attached to a particular technology. So I don't know if you shared the bio I wrote, it was kind of a joke, but currently at this moment in time, I am not doing Android actually. Don't tell other people, because you know they still think of me as an Android developer. But for the past few months, I've been literally programming in Google Sheets. So I'm helping an organization to manage their database, and the database is a Google Sheets, and there are JavaScripts to fetch data from Shopify, and it's fine. Like I'm not going to try to solve that problem with Android because it's not appropriate for what they are doing, because they're literally trying to move physical stuff across the country, and having a website to get people to place orders makes more sense. And it's fine. Like if you know Kotlin, JavaScript is not that different. There are different things, but like you have the same basic understanding of how to approach a problem and to translate it into code. That takes you very far. So for me personally, it's fine. I can do Android. I can do other things. I don't necessarily think it's very, very critical to pick the right thing. I think people are under a lot of pressure when they first get started. But then the second part of the question is, if you come today and ask me, hey, should I do Android? Then that's what I would tell you is, what are the people around you doing? Because for me, that is more important. If you have a good way to get help, to get you ahead, that is way more important than the technology itself. Because, I mean, you've done it, right? It's hard. It's not easy. There are always days when you are stuck with a problem and you just want to hit your head on the wall. Don't hit your head on the wall. Go find help. So whatever area you can find help is where I think will take you the furthest. So I know this is kind of like, it depends kind of answer. But truly, after be doing this for so many years, like, that's what matters. It's not the hot technology of today, which may change tomorrow. It's like the people and the problem that you're solving.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, prior to joining Pinterest, which is a while, like 5 years ago now, I didn't have any Android experience. And the reason I went into Android is exactly what you're describing, which is I felt like the community of Android engineers at Pinterest was very, very strong, and they could help me ramp up. And so I don't have to hit my head against the wall as much as I normally would.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Sam or Christina, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think both Chiu-Ki and Annyce really nailed it. I just want to echo what they've both already said, which is that I'm maybe a little ruthless in my opinion that you will like what you're good at. In most cases, like unless it's something like absolutely terrible, like, you know, someone's like poking you with a needle, that will never be fun. But I think the vast majority of people, like if they choose a career and they build up the skills to get good at that career, when you have a skill set and you're good at what you do, it feels great. Like if you're good at playing soccer, you love playing soccer. If you're good at playing the violin, you love playing the violin because it's nice to be competent. And so for me, like when I look at the industry, I kind of look at the tech and much to what Chiu-Ki was saying, I think if I apply myself to any of these, I believe in myself and my abilities to get good at any of these. And so when it came down to picking, I already shared, I did it for the money. And I think that worked out for me and I was lucky, but in hindsight, I probably would have doubled down on what Chiu-Ki said, which is that now that I'm part of the Android community, it's just, I glossed over this part, but I was a professional iOS dev as well. It was wonderful in different ways, but the Android community is really, really, really remarkable. And so if I had to go back and choose it all again, I would still make the same decision, but probably less so for the money and more so because if I am going to choose something to get good at, why not choose the thing with the most incredible community that's given me lifelong friends and a supportive work environment and, just like endless challenges, like Annyce was saying, in terms of feeling like you're full stack. Like there's so many benefits there. So I'm just glad that my more naive, like do it for the money approach led me to such a rich culture. And so I'd make the same decision, but for different reasons, I think.
Yeah, I
want to add one more thing.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, as a segue into Sam, one thing I wanted to touch on, which is an extension of what Annyce was saying, which is that, like compared to backend development, Android just feels so much more real, for lack of a better word. You can show people. And I think one thing about Android, even compared to iOS, is that it's much more open. The barrier to entry to publishing an app on the Play Store is $25 one-time fee versus a $100 or $99 annual fee. So I know, Sam, you mentioned that you have at least one or two apps, right, published in the Play Store. So maybe talk about what apps did you have published and like your contribution to the open source world of Android as well.
Oh yeah. So I had one app on the Play Store. I think like the backend for it has kind of languished a bit. So I pulled it off, but it was like my first app was kind of basically like an app that kind of scraped like the IM Sports website for my university, and kind of put that into like a more or less like running a cron job every night because it only like updated like once a day, and then like wrote it to a file and then basically like served that as like an API, and that's kind of like how I how I kind of powered this app. So that was a lot of fun. I think that taught me a lot of things. Yeah. Yeah, I think in terms of open source, I think like I have a couple, but like not, I wouldn't say that I've got like extensive open source experience. I open source like one thing, and I think it got like I got like, I don't know, like 200 stars on GitHub, which I feel like is pretty okay. But I think stuff like that is just like really, really neat to do. And I think it's something that's kind of, I feel like I don't know too much of what's going on in like iOS or web, but I feel like, like being able to kind of build something and kind of show it off to everybody, I think is pretty fun. And I think it gets you a lot of like career growth too. I've known people who have, built like open source stuff, and then that kind of just like propels their career forward in like pretty fantastic ways. Because it gives you like kind of street cred, and you can kind of like, you can present on that at conferences. It's just kind of like, overall, like you can go a lot of different directions with that. Yeah. I think I +1 like everything everyone's already said. The only thing I'd add is like, I think the future of Android development is pretty bright. I think like there's a lot of new stuff, especially with like the Jetpack stuff, like it's with Compose. I don't know if y'all have talked about it in this class, but definitely something to look into. I think it's kind of early stages, but that's going to really, I think, change the game. So I think like there's never been like a better time to do Android.
Yeah, it's worth noting. Oh, I was going to say it's worth noting that Android runs on like 70% of the world's smartphones. So if you're looking for like career security, it runs the majority of the phones in the world. It doesn't seem like that in the area that probably most students are in around Stanford, but worldwide, Android has just dominant market share. So that's nice.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of operating system, Android is by far the most popular OS in the world. So I feel like that's a huge reason that many people are attracted to Android. And Sam, your mention of Jetpack Compose is a perfect segue into my next question, which is on technology. So in the class, we haven't talked about Compose at all. And like one of the things that I think students will realize, even just having worked with Android for 10 weeks, is how many choices there are to make around language, frameworks, architecture. So I'll start with Christina, because I think Christina is actually quite well known for being a huge Kotlin advocate, which is a language we all used in this class. So maybe talk about, Christina, like, did you jump on that train so early on? And how do you make the decision about what other things to adopt out of the many things that are happening in the Android ecosystem?
Yeah, this is maybe not the answer that people want, but I find these decisions to be a people problem, and it's one of the biggest learnings that I had. So to give context on what Rahul is referencing, the startup I was at got acquired by Pinterest, and within a week of that acquisition and my start date at Pinterest, I came in and was like, "Hey, can we use Kotlin here?" And started this whole long running introduction that ended up blowing up in many ways. Sam was there for it. There were a lot of hurt feelings, and in the end, it all worked out to the benefit of the company and to the benefit of our developers, and people just have glowing reviews of where we ended up. But it's easy to lose sight of the year that we were transitioning, where we hadn't yet reached that goal, and there were a lot of hurt feelings, and those hurt feelings were not irrational, because people, their job means a lot to them. Like it's how they make their livelihood. It's a lot of like milestone setting where you get your self-worth. And so when someone comes in with a new technology and advocates for you to use it, that can be very threatening to the people around you, because it can make them feel stupid and it can make them feel incompetent if you don't do it right. And so my general philosophy on adopting new technology is very people first, which is that people have limited bandwidth for learning new things, and you can very easily get your coworkers or the people on a project with you on your side project, whatever it is, in a shutdown mode of fear if you try to do all of them at once. And so if you want to learn something new, I think it's very, very important to, one, make sure that there's a really good payoff for that, because you need to weigh that against the humanity that you're going to be dealing with on the other side, and two, only do one at once. So I think it's very common in side projects to be like, I want to learn like Compose, and I want to learn Kotlin, and I want to learn Retrofit, and I want to learn Realm or whatever database layer you're using. And if you try to do everything at once, you're going to end up doing nothing. And so that was probably my big takeaway with my experiences at Pinterest, introducing like kind of huge shifting technologies, is one, you have to be there for the person who's learning that technology, and two, don't try to do more than one at once. So yeah, I guess that's maybe less technical than might be ideal, but I just view new technologies as almost entirely a people problem, and like 5% an integration problem about like ironing out bugs with alphas or getting the compiler to work. Like that's a very small fraction of the time of these projects overall in a large company. In our startup, it was very different. You could just throw a new technology anywhere and people would be like, oh, great, yeah, whatever. But in a large company or in, maybe a project with your friends, I think you have to be really cautious.
Yeah, that's actually a really good perspective, that there's so much people. It's not just a technology decision, it's very much a people decision as well. And so I'm wondering, Annyce, you're an engineering director at Meetup. From the kind of the management perspective, maybe, how do you think about adopting new technology into the code bases that you are managing or dealing with?
Yeah, if I put on like my manager hat, it's a totally different perspective from engineer Annyce. Engineer Annyce wants to know the latest thing as soon as I see somebody on Twitter be like, have you seen V001 beta-2 of whatever? I'm like, download it, try it out. But as a leader of the company, we can't have that same approach. We definitely want to think about the engineers and their happiness, as well as like their career aspirations. So one thing I like to do for the team is say like, look, this really cool thing is out. Let's have a hackathon as a team. Let's just try it out. Like we're not making any commitments, but I want you to experience it. I want to see the pros and cons, and think about potential use cases for this particular thing in our product, but no promises. I think the other thing that I'll try to do is like encourage the team to go to conferences, explore what's out there, learn about the new things, but then be realistic about whether or not that's something we should incorporate in our app. For me, one thing, like as an engineer, if I'm strictly thinking about as myself as an engineer applying for work, when you start seeing it in the job descriptions, it's too late. Like by then, everyone knows it, and you're kind of behind the ball a little bit. So it's mostly when I see it consistently in newsletters that I think, oh, okay, this code routines aren't going anywhere. This is maybe like the third or fourth different newsletter I've heard talking about code routines. In this case, that's something that I'll add to my list of technologies I want to become familiar with. By the time you start seeing it in job descriptions, you're at a slight disadvantage if you want to be commanding top prices and, being in the lead among your peers. So that's sort of how I think about integrating new technologies from those two different perspectives.
And then Chiu-Ki, you're an independent mobile developer. And I think what you were talking about earlier, hinting at a very pragmatic to problem solving, which is that you're right when doing programming, which is totally different from Android, right? It's like a very like problem and how can I best solve it? Give your perspective on how do you think about technologies to use when you build out an app for a client?
Yeah. So there is a lot of stuff out there. That's one thing that is not going to change in our field. And when I go build something for my client, I stick with what I know because I want to be able to give a very accurate estimate on how much time it's going to take. And because I bill by the hour, right? So if your estimate is really far off, then they don't trust you. Like, well, do you even know what you're doing? So usually when I'm on client work, I don't like just dump a new technology in the middle of it and learn as I go. When you're an employee, that's different. Because learning is a part of your job versus when I am selling literally my hours, like I don't bill my learning hours. I mean, I do try new things. It's not 0%, but it's not 80%. It's more like 20%. I will be comfortable with introducing things that I'm not familiar with. So when I'm on client time, I usually stick with what I know, but I discuss it with them. So I keep myself educated on what's out there, what's available. So I go to conferences, I subscribe to newsletters, I read articles. But I would call myself something that is on the level of knowing what words to Google, is how deep I go into these new technology. So I kind of front load them. I know them. Okay, I know that these are the possible ways to solve this kind of problem. I don't then jump in and learn and write the code right away. But if I end up talking to a client and they talk about what they need to do, then I can tell them, say, hey, I know that this is a possible solution that we can look into. There's also this existing way of doing things. And by that point, I have a little bit of idea of the pros and cons, even though I have not done it yet. And then we can kind of talk it out and see. And I will be completely frank with them. So this is something I know. This is something that I will have to figure out, but it could potentially be a better solution for you. So it's interesting to be an independent developer because you kind of lay out the term of what you want to do on the table and ask, all right, so this is a trade-off and I'm presenting it to you because you're literally paying for it. So I don't necessarily, as a result, explore technologies on actual kind of practical apps that I'm shipping. What I usually do, if there's something that I figure that, hey, this looks interesting enough that I want to explore a bit more, what I do is I write a little toy project that just uses that technology. Of course, you have to add in new things. You always have to use retrofit. Whatever you do, you gotta have some internet in there, right? So it's not going to be literally just that one thing you do, but I keep it as small as possible. Then I can really get a feel for what it does and what's difficult about it, what's good at. And then I write a blog post about it so that people know that I have done it, so I don't waste my time just under the rock because I learned it. No, if I've learned it, I will tell the world that I've learned it. But again, this is a little bit driven by the fact that I'm an independent developer, so that when my potential clients look for me, they can read my blog and they can be like, oh, okay, she knows how to explain things. She probably knows how to do things too. Which, I mean, you can do it too, even if you're not an independent developer. And it actually is a very good skill to have, communication. So that's tend to be how I treat new technology. But I know that they exist, and if there's one particular one that I think I want to learn a bit more, then I do a very small project and then I write about it. So
that makes a ton of sense. Jason has a question in the chat. This question is primarily for Chiu-Ki. What's your motivation for being an independent mobile developer versus joining a larger company? And how do you think about the non-engineering parts of your job, things like marketing, pricing, and sales?
So what's my motivation? So like I said earlier, I basically got my degree and I went into your traditional big company software engineering job. And it was kind of an interesting but silly decision. Basically, I decided that I'm not going to retire at this company. I want to try different things. So I went from the big company to a startup because at that point I lived in Sunnyvale. I was in Silicon Valley and I was surrounded by startups. So it just felt like a missed opportunity if I don't at least try once. So I went to a startup. That was when I was doing web dev. And I didn't like it. I didn't like the fact that in a startup environment, even though you may think that you will be able to do a lot of different things because there aren't a lot of companies. At least the one that I was at, I was strictly on coding. Like the CTO and the CEO would dream up something that they would want to try and then throw it across the wall and ask me to do it. And I was like, no, like I want more control of what I am doing rather than just someone like the startup I was at, like it just felt like the CTO woke up and got an idea in the shower and come in and tell us in the daily stand-up that they want us like to implement it. This was very frustrating. So I think at that point, then I was like, okay, I don't really like this startup. Maybe it's not a good idea to extrapolate, but what if I try something else? So I gave myself 6 months to try to be an independent developer and see how I like that. And that worked out. I actually find that challenge really interesting. The fact that, like I said, I go into a small startup, and that is when I actually come in a power position, right? I do talk to the CTO, but it's not to implement his idea. It's to work with him and figure out what is the business need, like why are they doing this? Is this the particular technology something that we should be using to implement your end goal? Versus when I was just a software engineer in the startup, they don't have that kind of time for me, which is kind of interesting. It's almost like I'm the same person. I didn't change. But by defining my role as the consultant, I got what I wanted. So then after the 6 months, I was like, okay, this is difficult. It's difficult. So I'm going to answer your second part to tell you why it's difficult. But I enjoy the challenge. So in terms of pricing, marketing, sales, etc., pricing is very opaque, right? Like you can go to the internet, you can search for like how much do people charge, and you don't know where those data come from. So it's a lot of going around, asking your friends, and doing your own groundwork. And then what I do is I do one company, and then I turn around to the next one and up my rate and see if they will bite. And if they don't, then maybe it's too high. It's literally try and error. There's no magic at it. Of course, that means that you have to be willing to accept no's, right? Like if you push the envelope and they push back, it's actually a good sign. That means you're actually at the point of resistance, right? If people always say yes to your offer, that means your offer is too low. So that's how I figure out pricing, ask my friends, and then get my own data points. Marketing, speaking, blogging, that's what I do. When I first started as an independent consultant, I made it a point to have a good internet presence, because that's how people figure out anything these days. That you go on the internet, you type it in the search engine, and then you see what pops up. So I'm basically feeding search results into Google. Right. I want to make sure that whenever someone types my name, they see my talks, they see my blog posts, they see things that I've done, and they can use that as their data points to decide that, oh, okay, I think she knows what she's doing. And it has paid off. They don't directly lead to contracts. I must caveat that. So my contracts are mostly from friends of friends. So I have not worked directly with friends because I felt like when I negotiate, I'm ruthless and my friendship is on the line. So I don't want that. But friend of friend is the perfect buffer. There is the social trust that we have something in common, but I can still be very professional. I mean, I said ruthless, but I'm just being professional. I'm just being, hey, this is what I can give you. This is what you will give me. I'm not sure if I can do that with my friend, to be honest, like with the business phase, because we are friends. But then this friend of friend will probably go do their research and figure out whether they would trust what I tell them I can offer them. And that's where the blogging and the speaking comes in.
I want to double click a little bit on one thing you said, Chiu-Ki, and then Annyce, we can get to your question. But one thing that I wanted to get a little bit more detail on, and this is a question for everyone, is that marketing component. And I think in my mind, marketing it's not just like, oh, I'm going to put a flyer on the wall. It's like just posts, talks, maybe open source. So I'm curious, I think all four of you are very, very accomplished at that. How do you think about that? Because I think on one end, you and Chiu-Ki, I think both have full-fledged courses that you've developed, either on Lynda or LinkedIn Learning or other platforms. Christina, you're you're a prolific conference speaker. Sam, you've done, like you talked about, you published apps, marketing in some sense, or open source. So I'd like to just get a sense from all of you. How did you make the decision about where do you spend your time to engage the community? Maybe Annyce, do you want to start? Because you have...
Yeah, I can start. I mean, partially I'll say it's Chiu-Ki. Chiu-Ki is so great at being like, Annyce, stop it, go speak at a conference. Like she encouraged me to speak at my first conference. That kind of push really kind of changed the whole trajectory of my career, to be honest. And every step of the way, when I'm sort of worried or nervous about something, I'll run into Chiu-Ki at a conference and we're like, so what's life? And we can catch each other up and she's like, no, don't put up with that. Keep moving forward. And that's been really, really encouraging to me to have that sort of support and that push. And how I like to think about it a lot is like my career is nothing to do with my job per se. I'm sort of like, oh, this is where I'm currently working. I love Meetup, but that's where I'm currently working. I think it's important to have residual income. So I don't agree with having all your eggs in one basket. And this, I think back in the day, I'll say like in the 70s, people would go work somewhere and stay there their whole career. Their job would love them. They would retire. They get pensions, all this stuff. Nowadays, companies almost expect you to leave. They're kind of like, hey, it's been, so what are you still working here? Like, what's going on? It's almost like they expect you to leave. So you want to be able to have your own brand to carry with you and get those opportunities. At first, I used to do things a lot just for exposure. I'm sure you all have been invited to do things for exposure. And then eventually I'm like, I am exposed. Pay me. Like, now how much money is that going to be? Okay, so how much of my time and how much money am I going to make? Every time I say yes to something, that's me saying no to my family. That's me saying no to my kids being like, hey, mom, watch my puppet show or whatever. So at this point, I think a lot about if I say yes, what am I saying no to? And that helps me to be a bit more strategic. This sort of thing, I absolutely love teaching. So this opportunity, this was a no-brainer for me. But there's so many things that people ask that I have to just say no. Hi, Annyce, I took your course. Can you please mentor me in everything in life? And it's like, no, actually I can't. I can't do that. And the list goes on and on and on. Hi, I'm working on my thesis. Can I do some research on you for 5 hours for the rest of the year or whatever? Like it's all these requests. And I think, if I say yes to that, what am I going to have to say no to? And that really helps me.
Yeah, to add my perspective here, I very much am a little bit selfish in my marketing, which is that I never thought of it as marketing until it worked. And then I was like, oh, wow, look what I was doing for my career all that time. But I didn't go into it with that. The reason I got into public speaking was, one, because I love being with people and teaching people, and just the energy from conferences feeds me. But two, like it also, and Chiu-Ki knows this because just like Annyce said, Chiu-Ki pushed me to get into public speaking very much for like a social justice reason, which is that the industry needs representation. And one of the ways you can be more visible than if I'm just typing at a computer within my big company is to go out on stages and be like, I'm in computer science. I'm good at what I do. I'm going to share my knowledge with you, and you're going to understand that people who look like me are knowledgeable in this area. And so for me, public speaking was very much something that I did for fun and something that furthered my moral, like compunctions around like what I want the world to look like. And in hindsight, it ended up being like a huge boon for my career. But to Annyce's point, if you aren't in love with doing that sort of work, or if you're doing it strategically, you really have to be more conscientious of the trade-offs, because it will suck so much of your time. It is like very glamorous in theory, and then when you look under the cover, it's like hours and hours and hours of research and pulling together decks and rehearsing and traveling and all of these different things. And so I feed off of that, which is why it's always just been like, oh yeah, of course I'll go to all these conferences. But I think for most people, you would want to be a little bit more targeted in that. And like Annyce had this very insightful moment of saying, like, what am I going to say no to? And as soon as that cost benefit tips over, like as soon as you've been exposed to the point that you've had all the career benefits that you're going to get, then like, yeah, start prioritizing other stuff. For me, I still find it fun, so I'm still doing it. But I think that's less about what I want from my career and more about what I want from the world.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's a combination of like the learning you get from teaching other people, but there's also a huge amount of career benefit, which is, I think, what you're describing, Christina.
Oh yeah, I guess I glossed over that, but career-wise, public speaking is incredible. Like, and I run into people, and Chiu-Ki started this bandwagon for me and for many others, where people say I have nothing to speak about. That is a limiting belief. It is false. I guarantee that you always have something to speak about, and you should do it, because I can't even, just like Annyce said, just inflection point in my career. Like my career was like this, and then it went like this. And it was because of public speaking. Like one that comes to mind is I got to announce the addition of Kotlin to the Android platform at Google I/O, which is the first time they had added a new language since its inception. They had never had someone outside of Google speak at that conference. And so I get to get up on stage, in front of like a streaming audience of 50,000 people. And that was directly because I had been giving talks about Kotlin. And so when the topic came up, they were like, oh, hey, you should come and do this. And that opened a lot of doors. And it was all just because I had happened to give, quite a few talks about Kotlin in the preceding months. So it really, it's non-linear, but the payoff is huge.
Yeah, for people who are interested, maybe on Piazza afterward, I'll send out Christina's talk at I/O where she does the announcement. The next student question from Onyi is for Chiu-Ki. What were the main lessons and critical moments before you decided to become an independent developer?
So I think I spoke a lot about the kind of marketing and building up my Google search results. But before that, first of all, I would not encourage anyone to do this before you actually have an experience working with a team. Because when you're independent, you're coming in a vacuum almost, right? So if you don't know how most software engineering teams are organized and how most business run their business, it's very difficult to then just kind of parachute in and be able to communicate with them and know what they want, know what they need. So that's the number one step, is to actually have some solid experience working as a part of a bigger team. And then the second part is have savings. So I gave myself 6 months. Why did I give myself 6 months? Because I know I can go without a salary for 6 months. And that gives you that peace of mind, so that you're not on pressure to just take the first contract that you see, right? You can go around, you can actually kind of figure out what is the market, like what can I offer that is going to be something that I like and something that gets me money, right? So having savings is critical. And the third part probably doesn't apply to most of you, is I didn't even think about being an independent developer until I had my green card. It's very practical, but yeah. So when I graduated from school, it was not an option. It never crossed my mind that I would not get a traditional job. And not only that, going for a startup is also not an option because I cannot afford to have the company sponsoring my H-1B go under. So I knew I had to go for a very, very solid company that will be there for me, that has the lawyer that will like get me through the immigration. So I went through that path for a lot of very, very practical reasons. But even if you don't need to have a big company to sponsor your green card, it's still, I think, a very crucial part to be able to see how things are done. Because usually if you consultant, you're kind of attached to a team anyway. It's not like you and the CEO, the two of you are sitting in a, well, I guess nobody sit at co-working spaces anymore, but sit in the co-working space and figure it out. So having experience working at a company helps a lot. Beyond that, I think one of the things that made me comfortable doing it is that 6 months. And not only that I know I have 6 months I can go on, but that is I time boxed it. So I said, okay, I'll give myself 6 months, a year, whatever a number of months you feel comfortable with. And we will reevaluate at that point. And if this is not working out, it's okay. Go back. I'll get back a full-time job and I will continue whatever I was doing before. I think that takes a lot of the pressure off, rather than just aimlessly trying to land a contract and then never land one, right? I know that like if 6 months is over, I could not for the life of me figure out how to land a contract, well, then this is not for me. It's okay. So I don't know if you want me to say more, so let me know if there's anything specific you're interested in knowing.
The second question on you had was, how do you stay plugged into the internet community? What are the best ways, in your experience, to be up to date?
Twitter. Twitter is the best way.
I was thinking that too.
I mean, we're all on Twitter. Like, okay, a lot of us are on Twitter. When I first got started with Twitter, I created an Android devs Twitter list. And then I would just like check that list all the time to see what people were talking about. Like, ooh, that sounds interesting. Oh, I didn't know Android Studio could do that. I was just on Twitter all the time. Now, since I don't do it as much, I did delete the Twitter app because it's very addictive. But if you're not at the point of addiction, Twitter is great for staying up to date with what's happening with the community. And if you have no idea what you're doing about some code, post it on Twitter. Trust me, 5,000 people from nowhere will come and correct you. And it's really great. That's how you can learn pretty quickly. If I'm super confused, I'm like, oh, this code isn't working. And then all of a sudden people jump on Twitter to tell me why I was wrong and how I shouldn't even write that code in the first place or whatever. So you have to have some thick skin, but Twitter is really great to stay up to date with the community.
I like to say Twitter is the LinkedIn for programmers, for like the CS community. Like I didn't have Twitter until I really got into my CS career. You really, it's so important to have a Twitter presence if you want to have this low energy, high return stream of information just constantly at your disposal. There are other ways to stay linked into the community. I just find them to be higher friction. Like you have to have like email newsletters, or you have to go check some blog all the time. Twitter, it's just like anytime someone updates their open source library, they'll post it on Twitter. If someone's giving a really cool conference talk, they'll post it on Twitter. If someone has issues with code, or if they discovered a new extension method or something, they always post it on Twitter. It's just a fire hose of what's happening. But I also have deleted the app for the same reason Annyce said, which is that it's a fire hose. So you could just stand there and be like, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff, and then spend your whole day. So I also had to get rid of the app because it was a little too addictive. But it is just a wealth of information, and it's free. This website's free.
Yeah. Plus one on that, I just wanted to add that all four of you I have been following on Twitter for a while, and that's actually the main reason, or one of the reasons that I reached out and I was able to get all four of you. So big plus one on Twitter. Yeah, Sam, you were going to say something?
Oh yeah, I think like yeah, Twitter's great. I think like a lot of the like developers and like Google will like post on their Twitter like whenever they release something new. There's even a Twitter account for like what your min SDK should be, which is kind of like a joke, but it's kind of like true at the same time. I don't know what they base it on, but it's usually generally accurate. I think there's also like a lot of like, aside from like the serious stuff, a lot of like kind of entertaining stuff that kind of happens on Twitter too, especially around the Android community. Because, like I think there's a lot of like kind of weird things about Android sometimes, which I'm sure you discovered in this course. And that's kind of a source of like kind of Android developers kind of getting together and like commiserating or like finding weird things in the Android SDK. Yeah. I think Reddit too sometimes can be like a good kind of way to find stuff. Things will get promoted there, like new open source stuff. But yeah, you kind of have to like sort through things a little bit more carefully there.
The one question I commonly get from students is, I'm graduating soon. Should I actually invest the time to learn Android, iOS, Native, and Flutter, and these cool new cross-platform technologies? Wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd say I've played around with Flutter and like a few of the other kind of cross-platform things. I think they're great. I think they have like their use cases. I think it's all kind of contextual about like it's kind of like Chiu-Ki was saying at the very beginning. It's like Android is a tool to solve a problem. Like these frameworks are also tools to solve a problem. They fit like an area of like, it's like, maybe we don't have like enough time to kind of invest in like implementing this native on like both. So we have like this cross-platform thing to do both. I think it's another kind of tool like that you kind of have to weigh against like using Android or using like kind of implementing it in iOS. Yeah, it's kind of like a non-answer, but that's like engineering is all about trade-offs. So you kind of have to like just kind of weigh the pros and cons of everything. Yeah.
Sorry, Rahul, I cut out a little bit for your question. Was the question about whether to learn Android and iOS versus a cross-platform tool?
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're graduating soon, how do you think about investing the time to learn one technology like React Native or Flutter?
Got it.
Give you two apps versus going deep into platform?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I've had professional experience in iOS, Android, and React Native. So both mobile platforms and a cross-platform technology. I've shipped apps in my career in all three. I think if you're looking for career stability and the like benefits that come with that in terms of mentorship and established teams and resources, going for either Android or iOS is going to be, generally speaking, your best bet. React Native is very much an established technology, but it's often used either by startups or if it's in a company, like I manage React Native at Pinterest right now, it's an add-on. And so we don't have like React Native developers. We have Android developers who will work in React Native, or we have iOS developers who will work in React Native. And so if you choose to learn only something like React Native or Flutter as your first technology, I do believe you're going to narrow down the funnel of opportunities that you can act on, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I tweeted out about this a couple months ago that like I said, I have experience with all three, and the one that I get reached out to most about on LinkedIn is actually React Native. So you narrow the types of opportunities, the amount of opportunities you can take, but because there's less supply there, there's also a pretty high demand. So the fact that I have a lot of experience with React Native has kind of put me into this vacuum where people start their React Native app and there's just not a very high preponderance of senior developers with that skill set. And so if you do have that skill set, you're in very high demand. So I think that's really a cost benefit analysis of whether you want to borrow a phrase from Annyce, like put all your eggs in one basket, or if you go into Android or iOS, the path to going into Flutter or React Native is always there. Like it's a very common crossover. I think it's less common to be a full-time React Native developer who then starts picking up Android. It's usually in the opposite direction in my experience in the past 3 companies.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I feel like with a lot of these cross-platform things, it's like you're gonna, unless you're building like a super simple app, you may have to like build like something that's in like either like native things, because maybe the bridge or like whatever kind of thing that interacts with the native thing doesn't exist yet. So it does kind of help to have like that kind of native kind of experience, because then you can kind of like step outside of like the React Native world and kind of interface with like the actual, I guess, like OS that you're kind of building on top of.
Yeah, that's a great point. All 3 apps that I've shipped in React Native have required native work. So I still needed to draw on both Android and iOS skills. And if I didn't have experience with those platforms, I would not have been able to make that successful. It was not, I guess a better way of phrasing that is it was non-trivial Android and iOS work in order to ship the React Native app. Although that's changing now with things like Expo, and Flutter is much more self-contained. So that's evolving. But yeah, that's a great point, Sam.
Yeah, I would say if I had to choose, I definitely wouldn't choose cross-platform. I think it's interesting.
Annyce, I
Is
think
my
we lost
audio
you.
back?
Now it's back.
Yeah, now it's
Yeah.
back.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I would say I wouldn't choose cross-platform unless I already had some experience. So then I could kind of make some more money. I'm like, yeah, by the way, I know Flutter. Because chances are they're not going to keep you for a long time. So let's say I was a more experienced independent dev, I might choose to pick up Flutter as like a add-on for some company and charge a bunch of money to implement their app in Flutter. But for like a first-time engineer, I still feel like I would go with Android because there's just more. There's more resources. There's more examples. There's more sample code. Open source projects where you kind of don't know what you're doing, you just search on GitHub and you can find a ton of examples to get you through. Even if you don't have a huge network, you can make some. The code might be terrible, but it would work. And no one would really know. You could still make Android apps. I think it's a bit harder with iOS, but I do notice that they make slightly more money than Android developers. So if you're willing to put in the work, you could start out making slightly more money doing iOS. So, it's that trade-off that you have to think about when you want to get started.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with an answer that is probably not what you're expecting, which is don't bother. If you're about to graduate and you put in 2 months of work learning something, and you come into my company and you're interviewing, I would expect you to be able to do those 2 months of learning while you're at my company. So the fact that you can add an extra 2 months of whatever is not going to be my decision-making point. It's going to be the way you tell me how you solve problems. Like I will put you on the spot and say, okay, I would like to have a Thanksgiving recipe sharing app where everybody can be cooking the same thing at the same time. How would you approach that? And it doesn't matter whether you have done Android or iOS or React or whatever. Like, because what I want to know is whatever my company needs, you will be able to pick it up. So, like, if you are doing it just so that you can land a job, I'm sorry, it's not actually like in my book, it's not going to help. But if you do want to spend 2 months doing something, what I will recommend is to pick something. Don't agonize on what it is. Pick something, pick a problem, solve it, so that you can come into my interview and we can talk about it. We can talk about, all right, so you have decided to make this app. Like, what problems did you encounter? How did you decide what to do. Like, did you try something that didn't work out and you have to back out? Like, that is way, way more important than the actual particular technology that you use. I'm sorry, I sound like a broken record, but like this is the technology world. It changes. So by showing that you can deal with changes, that's way more important than whatever you know today at this particular moment.
Yeah, plus one to everything that Chiu-Ki said. And just while we're on the topic, if you do have 2 months right before you graduate where you want to do something good for your career, study for interviews like it's nobody's business, because the return on investment of really doing well on an interview is much higher. At least in my experience, we don't expect new college grads to come in with an appreciable skill set, which is what Chiu-Ki just pointed out, which is why we give these algorithms questions as interviews, because we can't quiz you on a domain specific area because we don't expect that yet. And so if you know that the thing that they're going to decide on your leveling or your pay structure is going to be these algorithm questions, like, take the time, even though it's really not fun, to get good at them before your interview, and that will pay you way more ROI on your time invested.
I love that. I think that, Chiu-Ki, I think what you're saying is that, in some sense, the question itself is kind of a little bit misguided, that engineers are about problem solving. Like, your job is to solve problems. And whether you're using Flutter or React Native or Android or iOS is not that important. And Christina, to your point, the proxy that we have, because we don't test on domain specific knowledge, is algorithmic interviews, which are, again, that's like a big discussion about how accurate is that to assess problem solving, but 100% agree with what you just said. Okay, Jason has a practical.
Yeah,
go ahead.
One last thing. Mm-hmm. I do, however, want to say that the technology that you align yourself with can have an impact on your salary. So just facts, native engineers make more money than web engineers. So if we say it doesn't matter at all, from some perspective, it's not quite true. It will matter for your salary. So if you had to spend 2 months focused on some technology, if you were really thinking about like 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, whatever, how much money do I want to be making? I wouldn't choose JavaScript over Kotlin. Or I wouldn't choose, Java over Swift. I would try to align myself more closely with languages and frameworks where I know I can command a high dollar. Now, if later I happen to learn JavaScript, great, good for me. I can switch it up and use that tool as I need. But if I'm just thinking about from a financial perspective, it's easier to kind of go down than to go up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it kind of links back to Christina, what you said initially, which is that you Googled for high paying jobs and Android developer came up. So there is a very practical on the ground like payout that happens based on technology.
I'm all about going for the money. I don't have any compunction about stating that. I just to clarify, I do think that there's a difference between, like, the interviews tend to be generalist, but then you can choose what your job will be. So yeah, I think that it still will pay off to get really good at interviewing. But when you have a time to choose, like, I got an offer when we got acquired at Pinterest, I was able to choose whether I wanted to be an iOS dev or an Android dev, and I chose Android. But that's where, like, Annyce's point really comes into handy, which is, like, if you come in through the generalist track, which most new college grads do, because you're a blank slate, make that decision very carefully, because money is a real thing and it really impacts your life. They say money doesn't buy happiness, and, like, I'm sure that's true in some sense, but it can buy comfort. And there's a lot of problems in my life that I have the privilege to not face because I have a career that pays me well. So it's not something I think anybody should be ashamed of. I know there's a lot of hangups around discussing money and wanting money and all of this stuff, but man, you do you, everybody. Like, it's important, and do what's best for you and your family.
I love it. Jason has a practical question, and then after that, I have one kind of closing out question. So Jason, do you want to read out your question? How do you think about side projects while working a full-time job? For example, things like intellectual property protection and making sure that the company won't sue you later on once you leave that full-time job. And when you get to the point of publishing your app, Do you recommend publishing under an LLC, or is it fine to do it under your personal name?
So I can answer the second part. The first part, I will appoint Sam to answer it. So you have some time to think about. Because I've only done it as an independent. And what I did was I did create an LLC. And the reason is actually not because I think it will give me legal protection. From what I understand, if someone wants to sue you, you can't really hide behind an LLC. I didn't actually hire a lawyer to figure all this out because I was like, okay, I don't think this, little app's going to go anywhere. So I wasn't very, very precise about it. But the reason why I went with an LLC is because I want the listing of my app to be under the LLC and not my personal name, because that lends a little bit of credibility to it. So that was the reason why I chose an LLC. That is a little bit of extra legal protection, but I think if it comes down to it, if someone is determined to sue you, that's what I was told. Like, an LLC is not going to give you the level of legal protection that will be needed. And it's also a money thing. In California, when I started it, you have to pay $800 of tax every year, $800, whether you make any money or not. So I did it, and then I was just like, is it really worth it? And then I moved to Colorado, which is $10 a year. So that was a no-brainer. So of course I'll have an LLC. I'll have 10 LLC if I need 10 LLCs. So that's what I decided on. Of course, if you are really serious about it, then go talk to a lawyer. I didn't. I survived. Doesn't mean that you will not get into legal trouble. So as they say, INAIL, I am not a lawyer. But I have not done it while being employed. So that I think other people have experienced.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna kind of like build your own kind of side business or side, like you're kind of working on your startup, it's definitely a good idea to like not do things like not use like your company laptop, not use like any resources that the company provides. Like that's like generally like a big no-no. And, I feel like it's kind of like a joking thing, like in the Silicon Valley show, but like they kind of go through like the whole like process of like, did he use like company resources? And then like basically like, the company now owns like this guy's startup. So, that's kind of like a TV show. So like maybe you'll get caught, maybe not, but generally use like a separate laptop, separate resources. Because that'll just kind of like, maybe it's written into your contract. Maybe it's just like, something that like if people discover it, it's just like, it's kind of like something you might get fired for. So generally you should use like the resources for like your like own learning and like own development, but like kind of starting a business, that's where it starts getting kind of dicey.
Well, and it's also worth, again, caveat, none of us are lawyers. It's worth also distinguishing that I work for a search engine. If I got a great idea about how to search the internet and I started a side business in the search space, that would be probably very problematic for my employer. And there would be a quite high likelihood, even if I used my own laptop and I didn't do it during work hours, that there would be some litigation stemming from that. If I work for a search engine and I think like, oh, I want to build this app for like sharing cute dog photos, it would be amazing. There's no chance, but there is a much smaller chance that anybody in my company would care to investigate that or litigate that, because I am not a direct threat to them. So I think, again, with the caveat that I'm not a lawyer, you can gauge some of your own like the amount of risk you want to open yourself to. Like if you know that you want a side project that's a search engine, don't go work for Google, because they're going to think that you were siphoning your knowledge from work to your side project. That would not be good. So I think there's that little nugget in there as well as what Sam and Chiu-Ki were saying.
Okay, great. So a few minutes left. Last question. I'd like to hear from each of you. Probably the most common thing I get from students, give me some good career advice. And let me kind of frame that a little bit more, which is what makes a good tech lead? And like, what are the steps I should take as a Stanford student right now in order to become a strong tech lead for my team or for my company? So we can go in any order. I'd love to hear from each of you to wrap up.
So this is not just for tech lead, but learn to write concise emails. If you are able to summarize what happened in a discussion, laid it out, and then so that everybody know what they're supposed to be doing, and then you can hold them accountable, that will take you very, very, very far. Because a lot of it, I'm sorry, we are in a technical course, but I'm sorry, people are the most difficult. Because if it's you're in the team, I mean, you've done group projects, right? There's always that one person that doesn't do what they're supposed to do. And how are you going to make that happen? If you are able to actually record what was agreed upon, so that later they cannot say that they didn't agree to do it, it helps. And learning to write and being able to express yourself in such a way that people can understand very easily, very important. And engineers are not good at that. This is a stereotype. You can get good at it. It's like anything else, it's practice. So I would say get good at writing and use email as your practice ground, because writing blogs and whatnot, that's the next step. Nobody can escape from email. So you have to write emails, you may as well get good at it.
Yep, I'll go like one step back, like slightly more abstract. Learn how to communicate. Just period. Just communicate with other humans effectively. We are such complex beings, and we get triggered so quickly, and especially in writing, I find. So learn how to do it effectively. Put emojis in every message if you have to. Slap a GIF in your channel so everyone knows that you're just joking and it's fun. Like, make sure you're using the communication tools at your disposal to convey not just words, but the intent behind the words, the motivation, the context. It's so much more than that. We're having a conversation. It's not just the literal words out my mouth. It's my hands moving. It's my eyebrows going up and down. It's the smile that occasionally comes on my face. All of that is part of a conversation. And I think that's where I see people stand out above others, when they're really good at communicating concepts and ideas to different types of people in the organization, and doing so in an effective manner. I mean, that is the key differentiator from anyone that I see who can take on more leadership responsibilities, even though they might not even be the best technically, but they are amazing communicators and they just surpass the rest of their peers.
Sam, do you want to go?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, communication, like Chiu-Ki and Annyce said, is just like so important, like at the tech lead level, because you're literally kind of like leading like a bunch of people in like a project. So if you can't do that, like that's like kind of that's definitely a problem, I think. But I think like as like you kind of start your career, you'll probably be like there's different levels at like companies for like engineering, and like, you know, you usually start just like you're responsible for like a task level kind of scope, and then you kind of move up a level and it's like more project scope, and then you move up a level and it's more just like kind of what's like the like how do all these projects fit together scope, and then as you kind of go farther and farther up, like your scope increases and like your communication needs to increase too. And I think, you know, like for me, it's been kind of like a journey and kind of learning how to communicate, but definitely don't neglect that. Find like as many opportunities as you can to like practice and exercise that. I think like I have like a personal rule of like, if somebody asks me to like speak, like do public speaking, I'm not allowed to like refuse it, which like, you know, keeps, you know, like unless you like seek out those, I'm bad at seeking out those opportunities. So I think like that keeps like those opportunities there. And it kind of pushes myself to kind of get better at communication. So do things like that to kind of like get yourself out there. And yeah, like the more you do it, the easier it'll be. Yeah.
Cool. I will agree with everybody that don't think that going to tech lead level is about your technical skills, because it is very much about your communication skills. Like the higher up you go, the less in the weeds tech you need to know. But in order to diversify answers, I'll throw in two other things that have been skills I'm working on and that have really benefited me as being a tech lead, which is that one, like if you can develop a reputation for doing what you say you're going to do, that's gold. Like if someone can look at you and be like, I have this project and I know if I give it to you, it will get done. You will get the good projects and you will develop your skill set, and it will be this virtuous flywheel that just flies. And so in every detail that you can, if you say you're going to do something, do it, and the opportunities will start flowing to you. And in addition to that, I think one that has been difficult for me, but that's been very, very important for me when leading other people, is seek out feedback. We focus a lot on how hard it is to give feedback to other people, and that's a whole other topic, and it's very true. But it has been very, very beneficial to my career to actively tell people what I want from my career and where I want to go, and enlist them to help me do that, and to make sure I'm aware of that around the people who report into me as well. Like, what do you want from your career? And like that way, when there are projects that come up, I know how to align their interests with projects. And likewise for my manager, he knew where I wanted to go, and so he was able to align my projects with where I wanted to go, which really sped up my career. And I think a lot of times people are too shy to do that, or there's not like an opportunity. I've really had to be the one that said, hey, I want to talk about where my career is. I don't feel like I'm on track. Can I get your feedback? What skills do I need? What projects will give me those skills? So like actively manage your career, because nobody else will do it. Like it's nice to have mentors, but nobody cares about your career as much as you do. So if you want to go somewhere with your career, like manage it like you would manage, some MLB player or somebody else. Like manage it actively, have checklists, have check-ins, like have skill sets you want to acquire. So those two things I think definitely helped me in being a tech lead, and hopefully will continue to help me climb.
I think that's a great note to end on. Be empowered to take control of your own career, what you want to do, learn the things you want to learn. And I think we have 4 really good examples of that. So thank you so much to all 4 of you for spending an hour and a half with us. I think I already sent out the Twitter handles for all of you, but for the students, if you do want to follow up and kind of learn more about the panelists, I will send out another follow-up email with that info. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and thanks for a really wonderful class.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Take care.
thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.